I really believe women's basketball is a grassroots sport that is about connecting to the people that care about it. And so hopefully people feel that I was approachable, but also that I knew the game, that I prepared well, that I wasn't going to be outworked, wins, losses. The game is about relationships. And when you create great relationships, good things typically happen.
Welcome into the Sic Em Podcast. I'm your host, John Morris. Women's basketball at Baylor University has seen tremendous success over the years. And thanks to Head Coach Nicki Collen, it feels as if that level of success is going to continue for a long time.
It was really the motivation of the job, of the opportunity of coaching a program that had the ultimate success and the belief that I could get us there again.
In her first 2 years at Baylor, Coach Nicki has led the program to back-to-back 20-plus win seasons, back-to-back NCAA tournament appearances, and already has a Big 12 title under her belt.
Baylor family, your 2022 Big 12 regular season champions, the Baylor Bears.
Now, in year 3, all the pieces are coming together.
And Baylor has a win on their home floor over 4th-ranked Utah tonight.
Nicki Collen is a mother, a former WNBA Coach of the Year, a relentless competitor, and is proud to be the head women's basketball coach at Baylor University. The Nicki Collen life story.
Look out.
Isn't this great?
This is
Ready or not.
ready or not, here we come.
So you're a product of the Midwest. What stands out to you from those days growing up in the Midwest?
Yeah, I would say definitely a Big Ten girl. Certainly born in Michigan, didn't spend much time there, then lived in Ohio, Indiana, and Wisconsin. And it was, we just followed my dad's career. When I've told people that, people say, oh, were you in the military? And I said, no, my dad was an accountant. He happened to work for grocery stores and just kind of moved up the chain at different grocery stores in terms of like assistant controller to controller to CFO type thing. So just middle child of 3, always outside, started playing sports at a really, really young age. Soccer first, like everybody else, Little League. Basketball was actually one of the last sports I started playing. So just probably normal Midwestern life. Big Ten fan, you have to in those states. But pretty small town living.
Yeah. So basketball wasn't really your first sport.
No.
Soccer was first?
Yeah, I started playing, soccer's that sport you can play before you even know what's going on. Swarm soccer, a bunch of kids running around the ball. Probably my first true organized sport was baseball. I played Little League baseball starting in kindergarten, and then really fell in love with tennis when I started playing tennis. So if you'd have given me a choice in elementary school, where my career was going to go, where my life was going to go, I thought I was going to be the next Chris Evert, so basketball really, I didn't pick up a basketball until I was probably in the 4th grade. Like we had a gravel driveway. I didn't have a hoop. 3rd, 4th grade, played Y League with some friends and wasn't very good. And so it wasn't until we moved to Wisconsin and tennis wasn't really an option. Small town, no high school tennis team, just no feeder program. That we had a big driveway and a hoop, and I started playing in the driveway.
So then when did you start to focus on basketball, or did you play several?
Yeah, I played everything. I fell in love, I've said it before, but, my dad coached my 5th and 6th grade YMCA. I was one of 2 girls on my team, and there were probably a handful of girls in the league. We didn't have enough girls in our small town to really make, a girls' league. So I played for Pizza Hut, and we were both 5-0, and played American Family Insurance, and hit the game-winning shot. I probably wasn't even one of the best players on the team, but I knew at that moment, somehow when I point back, like that's kind of when I fell in love with basketball. So basketball probably became a priority in about the 6th grade. Like I played every sport. I did track. I played volleyball. I was a 4-sport athlete in high school. But when it came to summer camps, when it came to, when volleyball practice was over, I was getting basketball, getting shots up in the gym. So that's when I started to think about, where do I want to be? First, it was I wanted to play at UCLA. I wanted to be in LA, and then it was Stanford was my dream school. Iowa was my dream. I had all these schools over the years that kind of became my dream schools when it came to basketball. But yeah, no matter how much softball, softball was probably my best sport. But it was just that orange ball, something about it.
Shout out Pizza Hut. Wasn't there a story? Was it the game-winning shot you mentioned?
Yeah.
There's some story about that, right?
Yeah, well, that was kind of it. It was like that was our team, we had the ugly green jerseys with the Pizza Hut, and so yeah, it was, and certainly we celebrated by going to Pizza Hut, and probably, when you start screwing around with the roasted red peppers and then you touch your eye, and there are tough things about going to Pizza Hut in the old days, but yeah, that was the big Pizza Hut story.
So 4 sports in high school. When did you start to realize you might be good enough to continue and start thinking seriously about going to college and playing basketball?
Yeah, there were AAU programs. Back then, they weren't everywhere. I was invited to a camp, kind of an all-star camp at the end of my freshman year, when I'd been all conference in my league and started on varsity as a freshman. And I would say that was probably the summer that I knew, I remember playing against some players in that camp that went on to play at Wisconsin and Iowa, and remember thinking how good they were. And after the camp, someone told me that I was already better than them. And so that next summer I started playing AAU and played for Wisconsin Viking Club, played in the AAU Nationals. Our team made it to the Final Four that first year. And so that really kind of set off the recruiting. So, it just was so different then. I know it sounds crazy to people that aren't of my generation, but there was no internet at the time yet. So this idea of researching schools, and, you kind of knew what you read in the newspaper. And you didn't go on a million unofficial visits and travel the country and have access to everyone's rosters and how they played, and there weren't as many games on TV, and there was no ESPN Plus, so you couldn't watch them all. And so recruiting was just very different. You really dove into those conversations via phone and tried to narrow it down from there. And then the home visits mattered in terms of setting up official visits. And so I had a very traditional process. I think at one point I had a really hard time saying no and had like 20 home visits set up, and my parents were like, how are we going to do this 20 days in a row in September? And slowly I started to cancel them and really narrow it down.
Did you hear from those schools that you really liked at an early age? Did you hear from UCLA? Did you hear from Stanford?
I actually did not hear from UCLA. Stanford, Stanford chased a girl and got her named Jamila Weidman, who I played against on the AAU circuit. So certainly Stanford was never an option for me. But, I did get recruited by a high level by the Big Ten, and, all across the country, Duke, Colorado, it was, but had really kind of settled in on Purdue by about my junior year in terms of a school that was close enough that my parents could see me, far enough to get away from home, a school that had success but hadn't maybe turned the corner in terms of national prominence yet. And so really felt like I could help make a difference. Our recruiting class was ranked number 1 in the country. I say in spite of me. I think the other 3 players in the class were ranked in the top 15, and I was somewhere in the 70 to 100, range. But we went to a Final Four my freshman year. We won a Big Ten championship. We won a Big Ten championship my sophomore year and went to the Elite 8. So we did kind of what I thought we could do. I just wasn't much of a part of that in terms of on-court those 2 years.
Gotcha. So that leads you to consider transferring, and what was that process like when you go from there to Marquette?
Yeah, it was there was no portal. You went to your coach and you said, I don't think this is the right place for me. And you talk about I don't sweat. Like, I really don't sweat. Yeah. If you don't put me on a stair tread climber type thing, I could probably run 10 miles in 100-degree heat, and I don't sweat. But I still remember walking into Lynn Dunn's office, and the minute my mouth opened, like, there was just sweat streaming down. Like, I felt like every part of my body, because it was just, I've always struggled with disappointing people. And, it was really hard to get to the point of feeling like that was the right thing for me. I just knew that we had signed Stephanie White, who was the #1 rated guard in the country, and the odds of my career turning the corner as a junior, just, it wasn't going to be there. And I remember, Lynn saying to me, like, what do we have to do to get you to stay? Like, do you want to play softball too? Do you want to? And it was really that moment when she said that, and she said it in such a caring way, that I realized, I said to her, see, that's exactly why I'm leaving, because you don't know me. Because if I'd have wanted to play softball, I would have played softball coming out of high school. Like, I want to be a great basketball player. I don't want to be an engineer, even though, I was doing really well in the engineering program at Purdue. At that point, all I wanted to be was a basketball player. And so, I needed to find a place where I could play. I certainly knew I was going to get a good degree somewhere, but I needed to be somewhere where I knew that the minutes were going to be there for me. So, I really thought I was going to go to Toledo. Ironically, I've said this because playing in this league, Bill Fenley had recruited me. He was the head coach at Toledo. I loved him. I loved his system. And, but in high school, I thought Toledo wasn't the right spot for me. And so I really thought, okay, this is the time where I go play for the person that I always thought, the system, the style would work for me. And I visited Toledo, and it just still wasn't the place for me. So Bill likes to say not a lot of people get turned down twice. But, Marquette ended up being, they'd made the NCAA tournament the year before. They were kind of an up-and-coming program. They played, at the time, a very Loyola Marymount-style system, like very up-tempo, very point guard, keep it as long as you want to keep it, dominant. And Jim Jaber was personality-wise, like, just a really big change from Coach Dunn, who now I have an amazing relationship with as the GM of the Indiana Fever, and, had Queen, drafted Liz. So it was finding the right fit. It was finding a place that I knew I was going to have the on-court success that I wanted.
Would have been funny, wouldn't it, if you'd gone to Toledo, played for Bill Fenley, and now end up coaching against him?
Yeah, and I remember seeing him that summer, because ironically that summer, between my sophomore and junior year, had I chosen Toledo, that's when he took the Iowa State job.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah.
So he would have been gone.
It was, yeah. And I think, and I saw him that summer because I was coaching a young AAU team that summer. And I said, so you recruited me twice, but you would have left me anyway. And he said, no, you got to understand, like, because back then, not everyone went to summer school. Like, it wasn't like it is now. And so because of that, he's like, you wouldn't have signed anything. You would be at Iowa State right now. And I don't know if that's true. And, hindsight's always 20/20. But you only sign scholarship papers. You don't really sign an NLI. And so because of that, until you start classes and start on campus, you really can change your mind. So that would have been an even more unique twist.
Right. What was it about Marquette that you liked? How'd you end up there?
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of it was system. Coach Jaber, I think, could sell you the shirt off his back, and I don't mean that in a used car salesman type of way. Like, I think he's, I used to joke with him that I think he probably should have been a psychologist. He's coached a lot of different places, but the year I was sitting out, because back then there was no one-time transfer exception, I would be in the gym every day, and I would stop in, and he'd say, how you doing? And I'm like, I would say, I'm fine. He's like, are you fine? Are you really fine? Like, what does that mean? You know, and I'm like, I'm 20, I'm fine. Like, I just want to get some shots up. Yeah. You know, but it was also like system driven. Like, it was very much about learning to play fast again. You know, my strength was always my speed in the open floor. And so playing in a system, being at a school, I mean, the dynamics were so different to go from a true college town in West Lafayette and a Big Ten school to a city school. I wouldn't have chosen Marquette coming out of high school, but I think having had the experience I did at Purdue, it was a really nice change. Small campus, really close campus, really good education, but got to enjoy the city and Lake Michigan and Brewer games and Bucks games. And, you know, like it had a really nice feel to it that was different from where I was at.
You really had great success as a collegiate player. I think 4 NCAA tournaments, 3 all-conference, 3rd in the nation in assists one year. I mean, you had a great college career.
I had Purdue was team success. You know, I didn't have a lot of individual success at Purdue. Had some good moments, but certainly being able to say I played in a Final Four, even if that getting in game meant Marion Jones running past me in transition when we played UNC. You know, but I think my experience at Marquette, you know, helping a team to their first ever NCAA tournament win, advancing that my junior year, being in the NCAA tournament as a senior. We didn't win a conference championship when I was there, but, you know, played 35 minutes a game, got to be a leader, coach on the floor, just had a great experience. Jim Jaber ended up leaving and going to Providence, and I played for Terry Mitchell for 2 years, who was our assistant. And so even that experience playing, I think that part of my coaching philosophies, I always say, like, they've come from everyone I've played for and coached with. And, you know, there's things I take from Coach Dunn. There's things I take from Jim Jaber the year I was sitting out. I mean, he was so good at helping me get my confidence back. You know, in coaching, we talk about how no one can really take your confidence. But I think there's a difference between confidence and mojo. Like, you can say you're confident, but when you really get out there and you start to see success and stat good days and stat good games, you know, you really kind of get back to believing you are capable of anything. And, you know, but yeah, I played for 3 college coaches in 5 years. And so because of that, you know, I learned to adapt. I learned that there's different ways to do things. We played very differently at Purdue than we did at Marquette, and we played differently even at Marquette from Jim and Terry. So, you know, got a lot of experience in, like, kind of learning the game.
Did you go overseas immediately after Marquette? Did you go to Greece first?
I did. I went overseas immediately. I tried out for the Detroit Shock team. Ironically, Nancy Lieberman was the coach.
Oh, wow.
At the time, and was a part of the last cuts. And I really had no intention of going overseas, but I had a taste of the WNBA, and the ABL existed then as well. But I really had this goal of playing in the WNBA. And so, you know, I did. I went overseas, and that was the year the NBA lockout and the ABL folded. So it was a unique off season or in season, depending on how you look at it. You know, but I knew that was probably going to end my pro aspirations in the United States, because when the ABL folded and you had all those Olympians and great players flood the WNBA that only had 8 teams at the time, you know, there wasn't a lot of room for a Nikki Taggart. And I didn't see myself as a overseas lifer, which, you know, there's nothing wrong with. And a part of me looks back and thinks I should have done that a little bit longer. I should have given it a go and experienced kind of different cultures and made money and, you know, not really had real world stress because I don't think you do when you're just playing. But you know, it was time. It was time to change directions and figure out what was next.
Sounds like you weren't scared at all about going overseas. I mean, at that age, you're going way away from home, playing overseas.
No, I'd had the advantage of, you know, even as a youngster, like my parents, once we got to about middle school, I mean, we had traveled out of the country. I hadn't spent a lot of time in Europe, but I'd certainly traveled to the Caribbean and Mexico and gone to a lot of different places, and so was comfortable with travel. I played on an all-star team in college, and we went and did a 16-day tour in Italy. And so I had no fear of going overseas. I certainly didn't have any knowledge of Greek. But, we had agents. There were a lot of players playing overseas then. It was very different. You had to go to an internet cafe. We did at that point have the World Wide Web, and we could connect at home via email. But I always say, like, you're a taggart when you knew that, like, my parents bought an international calling plan back then. It was like 7 cents a minute, and it was so expensive to call internationally. So I would call my mom collect, and then when they would say caller, tell us your name, I would just yell, call me. And then she would call me back, because so many players that went over spent half their paychecks on calls home, because you didn't have FaceTime, you didn't have Skype yet, you didn't have any of these ways to connect for free, and now it's like, that's why I'm so encouraging now of players traveling and playing overseas, because you're never that disconnected. You really felt disconnected back then because you didn't have access. You watched American TV that was on between 1 and 4 p.m. and it was whatever, reruns of the X-Files that they wanted to play. And suddenly I became an X-Files fan because that's what I could understand. But yeah, I think today it's just so different, and it's so much easier to get back and forth and stay connected to friends and family and life in general.
Yeah. So how many years were you over there?
Just
playing?
one.
Oh, just 1 year.
One was.
That was it.
And it wasn't bad. It was just, I felt like I was doing it because I wanted to play in the W. And when I thought that dream, I was enough of a realist to think that another year over there wasn't going to get me closer to playing in the WNBA. So it was okay, here's where you have to make that tough decision in your life to hang it up and figure out something else. And a part of me wishes I hadn't hung it up. Like I still think I'm one of those people that could have played into her 40s because I loved it that much. I always say I only coach because I can't play anymore. And if I could play, I would have played. But yeah, for me at that time, I thought that goal is not attainable. I got to create a new goal.
So what age are you here?
I'm 23.
23.
Yeah. And
you make the decision that you're not going to play anymore. Coaching, was that something you were excited about or not really?
No. I had never thought I would go into coaching. Honestly, like Jim Jaber was actually the one coach that the whole year I sat out, he's like, I do not know why you spend all this time in labs and engineering. He said, because you're going to coach. He was the one person that said that to me. And I used to always tell him that there's no way I'll coach because I don't have the patience. I grew up in a house with an expectation of excellence. You didn't bring B's home. Because they knew we were capable of A's. I do believe my parents would have accepted a B if they thought that was the best we could do. But there were 3 valedictorians in my house, all 3 of us. And it's because of that expectation, that we're going to do the best at whatever we're doing. And so whether that was sports, clubs, whatever we were doing. And I just, I think one of the first things I learned playing collegiately is that most of my teammates didn't care as much as I cared. They were more talented. They may jump higher. They may shoot it better. They may, but I'm not sure there was anyone that ever worked harder than me. And, that repped as much as I did. Terry Mitchell used to say, I don't know why you take so many shots every day, because you're going to get into a game and you're going to pass and when you should shoot, because that's how I played. I was very much a pass first point guard. And, I would oftentimes look at my teammates and think, if you guys worked half as hard as I work, you could like you would make a career out of playing, because I played with so many talented players at Purdue and Marquette. And so I just didn't know that I could coach, because I wasn't sure I would know how to deal with people who didn't want it as bad as I wanted it. And so when I did get into coaching, the first lesson I learned was you've got to meet people where they're at, and you got to figure out how to make them a little better, or push a little harder than they even think they can go. And that's a win, because you can't make people want it. You can't make them see it. You can't make them, see all their potential. But you can push them outside their comfort zone. But yeah, that was why I felt like I didn't have the patience to work with people that didn't see it the way I saw it, that didn't love it, and love might be the bigger word there, that didn't love basketball. When people talked about like how hard I worked as a player, I only worked that hard because I loved it. Like, yes, there's a deep rooted need to be excellent and to prove things to people, but I also think it was pure like love at a level that I don't know that I've ever found doing anything else.
Colorado State, your first stop. How did that come about?
Yeah. Twists and turns. I had decided I was going to go into engineering, actually, and I applied for 2 coaching jobs just to see what it was about. And one of them was Arizona. Joan Bonvincini was the coach then, and one was St. Louis. And I interviewed at St. Louis and decided it wasn't the right place to start. The Arizona job was filled by the assistant from Colorado State. And so my current husband, who was the coach at Colorado State at the time, it was his assistant that got that job. And so he knew I had been looking. And I had been on a summer-long interview tour of America on engineering interviews. I had interviewed all over the country for engineering jobs, and I had decided to take a job with Motorola in Arlington, Chicago area. And I had about 3 weeks before I was supposed to start. And Tom called me and said, "Hey, I know you were looking into coaching opportunities, and I have a coaching opportunity, and it's a great job because you'd be working for me. It's a terrible job because it doesn't pay very much." And I just politely said thank you, but no thank you. I've taken a job. And he called me back 2 days later and he said, "I really think you should just come out here and check this out," and kind of like wore me down. And so I went on the job interview and I took the job. While I was there, it was a terrible job based on pay. I took about a $34,000 pay cut in like overnight. But it was to be back in the gym, to be around the players lifting weights. It was just one of those, I guess this isn't out of my system yet. Yeah. So I said yes, and I stayed, and I stayed for about a week and then flew home, packed my stuff up, and came back.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that was the start of your coaching odyssey, college, several places. So you're at Louisville and become a mom, and that changes your work schedule somewhat, huh?
Yeah. So when I got pregnant, I was actually pregnant with triplets. Carried triplets for 19 weeks, and knowing that we were getting ready to start a family, I had moved from an assistant job to an ops job. And I learned very quickly that I'm not a very good operations person, not because I'm not capable of doing the job, but you always had to do operations work as an assistant coach. It was just part of the job. But to me, the job that I loved was the coaching, the X's and O's. And so to make that move, I have twins, I'm an ops person, and I don't love what I'm doing. I love being around the program, but I recognize hey, if I'm going to be there, I want to coach. And if I'm not going to coach, I'd rather be at home. And, it just, there was never this intent to be a stay-at-home mom for 6 years. It was, this is not the right time for me. And so when I was at Louisville, I was home, got pregnant with Logan. The twins were 2, and Tom takes the Arkansas job, and his entire staff came with him. And I'm not sure, had someone not chosen to come with him, that I wouldn't have gone on staff at Arkansas sooner. But as it laid out, for 4 more years, that staff stayed intact. And, it really wasn't until Tom had 2 staff members, one leave to become a head coach, Zenere Antoine at Texas State, and Tim Eatman, who's also a head coach now, but left to be a coach at Boston College, that there was opportunity on his staff. And so it was the opportunity for me to come back. But that time away, it was hard. I'm not sure I was ever wired to be a stay-at-home mom. I did a lot of scouting from home. I don't know. I tried to be a supportive spouse. I don't know that I'm wired for that, hostess with the mostest, right. And I respect the women and men who are that do that job, because I think it's hard. I think being a coach's spouse is really hard. But you couldn't take the coach out of the spouse part for me. And so I did some TV, I did some radio, I did some scouting, some consulting. I did whatever I could when I was home. But I will say over that process, the best thing for me about that time was integrating in a community with people that weren't associated with the athletic department. When you get in coaching, and your work, your life, and your work balance, it doesn't exist. You tend to surround yourself with other staff, with people from the department. And it was the first time that I became friends with moms of kids my age, and got involved with things outside of an athletic department. So it was really, really good for me to have kind of a support system that looked different, that sounded different, that didn't know or even understand, what a coach's life was like or schedule was like. But whether it was a soccer mom and taking my turn, caravanning kids to games, or coaching my son's soccer team, or some of the things I was able to do during that stretch, I'm really grateful for, and I'm grateful to look back and say, as long as some of those days were with 3 in diapers and 3 taking naps and 3, that I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to be there for them. And also that I had the opportunity to get back, that my path looks very, very different than most people. And I became a head coach later than I probably could have and maybe should have if I'd have had a very normal step-by-step trajectory. But I was able to do all the things, and people always say you can have it all. I don't know that you can have it all at once, but you can figure out how to have it all, at least at times.
So flash forward, your 3rd year here, and look, Connor and Reese are Baylor freshmen. How fun is that for you?
It's been amazing, and it's been amazing for me to have the support system. I mean, how the tides turn when all of a sudden your kids are telling you they're proud of you, after a big win. It's odd and in some ways so therapeutic. But Connor comes over and does his laundry. So sometimes he's in and out because he's in the dorm. Reese is busier with cheer, but having him here, having him around, seeing him, hugging him, has been amazing. But I think the best part about it is they're loving being at Baylor. And I think for a variety of reasons. Reese is really integrating and doing a lot of things. But Connor is kind of finding that independent spirit and finding ways to be successful in the classroom. And so it's been fun to see their paths and how they're different, and how they converge at times as well, and that they can be there for one another, but really still kind of have their own independent paths in college.
You have any engineering majors in there?
I do not. Connor contemplated it, actually. They're both business right now. Reese ultimately wants to go to law school. Connor really is kind of more into the marketing PR. Connor just wants to find a way to own expensive cars. I don't know. However he can get there, that's going to be it. He is very into cars.
Did you, as you get into coaching, was WNBA then a new goal for you?
No. I got into coaching because basketball wasn't out of my system. I don't think when I got into coaching, I thought this is my career. I think I was young. I think I was 23. I think, I was still trying to figure it out. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew that being around basketball was still like a happy place, happy space for me. And so, the WNBA was really just in its infancy at that point. And I became a fan. Becky Hammond was a Colorado State grad and had played for Tom and then was even a student assistant for us that first year I was at Colorado State. And so, I'm following her career. I'm following people I'd played against when we played against Tennessee or Vanderbilt, but I'm not thinking of that as a career path. At that point, I'm just trying to get my feet wet.
Yeah. WNBA, great success, end up as a head coach, Atlanta Dream, Coach of the Year. Then Baylor calls. What was that? What went through your mind when you had the opportunity to go back to college and come to Baylor?
Yeah, true story, about 2 months before Baylor called me, I was talking to LaChina Robinson, and she's like, you need to get back in college. Like, the college game needs you. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I really believe. And at that time, I really believed that my next step was the NBA. I loved the W, but I'd spent a lot of time around the Hawks training camp, Lloyd Pierce, and really was intrigued. And I thought maybe when my kids are out of high school, and they're kind of then suddenly a 72-game regular season and an NBA experience might be really good for me. So that's where my mind was, a couple months before Baylor called. But I will say the timing was unique. We had an ownership group change. Things were changing in Atlanta in probably a very positive way. But you're a little uneasy in those scenarios. I felt like the ownership group was very committed to me, but we were not coming off our best season. And, it was Doug Gottlieb was the first person that reached out to me and said, would you be interested in Baylor? We had become really good friends over the years. We're the same age. And he had come on a recruiting visit to Marquette when I played there. We dated a little bit, and then we just became really, really good friends. And he knew Kevin Gall. I don't know what that pipeline was or why, but exactly. Yeah, he said, well, if you are, he's like, someone from Baylor will reach out to you. I said, okay, and I kind of laughed it off. And then I didn't hear from anyone. And then the next day, Bob Bodine called me, right? And I had a good conversation with him. The next day, Matt called me. I had a good conversation with him. And then it was, I need to talk to the committee, but, we'd like to interview you and we'll come to you because we were in training camp. And so it just was a whirlwind. It wasn't a process of, I want to go back to college. I've been most of my career has been dictated by what's the right thing right now, not necessarily here's the 5-year plan, the 10-year plan. I was motivated by this opportunity, not necessarily because it was college or coming back to college, but just really felt connected in the interview process, with Javon, with Mac, with Kevin, with Dawn, with the people in that room that represented Baylor and all Baylor represents in the big picture, that I got excited, and certainly there's more stability in college coaching. I always say pro coaches are hired to get fired, but you're also allowed to kind of rally and get your next job even when that happens. And so there was stability for my family in this job, certainly, but it was really the motivation of the job, of the opportunity of coaching a program that had the ultimate success and the belief that I could get us there again.
All right, so we hope you coach for a long, long time here, but when your time at Baylor is done, how do you hope fans remember you?
I genuinely hope fans see an authenticity in, kind of who I am and how I relate that to the game of basketball. I want them to have loved how our teams play, how our teams represent Baylor, and represent Baylor as much as they represent the name on the back of their jerseys. You know, I hope they feel connected to me. I really believe women's basketball is a grassroots sport that is about connecting to the people that care about it. And so hopefully people feel that I was approachable, but also that I knew the game, you know, that I prepared well, that I wasn't going to be outworked, you know, that they felt confident, you know, every time we lined up against an opponent. You know, wins, losses, it's the game is about relationships. And when you create great relationships, good things typically happen.
Thanks again for joining us on the Sic Em Podcast, a Sport and Story production. If you enjoyed the conversation with Coach Nicki, head over to BaylorPlus.com where you can watch the extended, uncut video version of this podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast, leave a review, and tell your friends about us. I'm your host, John Morris, and I hope you'll join me next week on another edition of the Sic Em Podcast.